Grace and peace, and welcome to our show for today. This is the last word and the beginning of a new week that we're going to be sharing together. I ended last week by doing a live broadcast. I was on for a while. We had some technical difficulties on some of the social networks, but we're going to try that again soon and announce when we're going to be on live that you could chat with us, ask questions, and bring some clarity to some of the issues we're dealing with. We're in episode 34 today, Faith, Family, and Finances. I'm going to talk about some areas that will help us really begin to understand where we are and what we're doing in terms of our relationship to this. As always, I mentioned we're on all the various social media networks, so you can share whatever social media network you're on. Greetings to all of our students, all of our partners, all of our friends around the globe. If I start listing where all of you've been contacting me from, we would be here just doing that. But you know who you are, and I talk to many of you in person. And so having a calendar or a timeline that talks to people around the world is challenging. But for the last 10, 12 years, that's what I've been doing. Have not been traveling as much as I used to in the past. I've just been communicating. So having communication skills to talk and work with people all over the globe, it's been an honor to hear where the global church is going and the body of Christ. That's why I chose the topics that we have now in terms of where we are with the discussion. That's why I chose these, because they're very important to seeing where we are and what we're doing this last time. I think the real focus is that we want to keep in line a Christian worldview. And I know some of you want to get back to the various worldviews that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to get there eventually. But I want to talk about some things about family today. But as we talk about that in terms of our Christian worldview, I want to get back in terms of our church calendar that we're in right now. See, before we got into this solar calendar that we're in, before we got into the times that we're in right now and looking at a calendar, lunar calendar that we're looking at, there was a time, in fact, in biblical times, they worked on a agricultural calendar, or really the Jews had a worship calendar. So that particular worship calendar had 7 seasons in it. And those 7 seasons denoted how they were telling times by the agriculture, when to sow the crop, when to harvest the crop, when to do certain things. That's how the Old Testament Israelites function. And God designed worship around the functioning of their particular timeline. When we get to the New Testament, the timeline became a secular timeline of the Roman timeline, or the New Testament begins in what we call a Greco-Roman world, because ending some of the Greek culture that was in the world, in the emerging Roman culture, we then had a mixture in the first century of 4 intercompeting languages that sort of brought together where we were. The Hebrew, of course, was being spoken in the synagogue and in the temple. You had Arabic being spoken by the common people. The language of business was Greek, and Latin was emerging from the West, coming from the West and coming East in terms of being a dominant language that in the next few centuries, Latin was going to dominate. But in the first century, we have these 4 languages, 4 speaking languages. We have Hebrew being used for religious purposes. We have the Arabic being spoken by the common people that was around in the area, especially in the area of Palestine and other areas. You know, it wasn't called Palestine then, but in the areas of Galilee, Nazareth, and this area of the world that was going in. Then we had, of course, Greek, that was a language for business, because people that were traveling in all the known world, because of Alexander the Great, when he conquered the world, he made everyone learn his version of the Greek language, which he called Koine, which was, in a sense, a common Greek to everyone. And of course, Latin was beginning to be an emerging language because of the Roman Empire. And so Latin was going to take over the culture of the land pretty soon. But all 4 of these languages intersected. That means that there were 4 cultural things that were being done through these languages too, that we have to really get ourselves focused on and to know. So the 3 points of discussion I've been talking over and over again has been faith, family, and finance. And I want to focus today on the faith concept because it is so important. Family relations in the first century, the organization of kinship, particularly with close proximity and household, it was a interrelational dynamics of individuals who are kin within a cultural context. That really kind of defines family. Interrelational dynamics of individuals who are kin within a cultural context. And some of this was apparent in the early centuries of the church. So we need to examine the life and the average family in a certain time period, in a certain time, in order to understand the scriptures. The scriptures are written in a certain time period at a certain culture for a certain people. We can apply the principles, but we must understand the hermeneutics and what went on in there. In our modern culture, the word family typically signifies a nuclear group of people who reside together and are related either by blood or adoption, father, mother, and any children. The word is then expanded to refer to a long line of people to whom the nuclear family is connected. Now, this modern meaning of family differs greatly from the words used to delineate family within the first and second centuries. And we must understand that because the scripture has a different concept of what family is. In fact, there is no Greek or Latin word that specifically denotes what we may call a nuclear family. The primary Greek word for describing a family is the word orchis. Orchis refers mainly to a house or household. So the word holds a sense of a homestead wherein people are living together for a common purpose. There are over 100 occurrences of orchis in the New Testament, and 60 of those refer to a house or a home. And at least 12 of the occurrences of orchis represents a family or group of people. That's why the jailer in Acts 16 said not only for salvation, but you and your whole household, meaning that all who were living in your household for a particular purpose. The term orchis connotes a unit of persons, including servants, working and living together under the leadership of the head of the household. Now, when we're trying to construct early Christian families, we have some time. There's a apparent in the New Testament, Mark 10, verses 29 through 31. We meet the family as a household, a group of people bound together by close kinship, who live together and make a living together. This is a pattern found in many peasant communities in the first few centuries. This is how they dealt with family. The term orchis is vital to understanding the contents of family in the first and second century. And I want to emphasize that we're going to continue this on tomorrow because we want to talk about the Roman family in the first century. We want to talk about the Jewish family in the first century, and ultimately the Christian family, because what we have in the contents of Paul's writings is something that is derived from what he's developing from first century Roman concept of family and Jewish concept of families. And we're going to work on both of those in our next episode and talk about, because these 3 points of discussion, faith, family, and finances, we have to see how they come together, because in a cross-cultural community like they had in the first century, there were various worldviews that were interacting, opposing each other, dynamically affecting each other as we go about. We need to understand that hermeneutically, because when we're reading the contents of the scripture and understand what they are talking about in terms of family, we need to understand from what vantage point the scripture has given us information about family, whether we're talking about the Jewish household, talking about the Greco-Roman household, or we're talking about the Christian household, and how all of that affects in the known world and how it relates to us coming as an application to where we are in terms of what we call our nuclear family and how we pull that together into a Christian concept. Let me conclude by saying we are dual citizens. We're citizens of this world because it's the only world we know, but we're also citizens of a coming world, which is going to be a new whole world order. That's why the Bible tells us not to love the world, neither the things that are in the world. Because if we keep loving the world, we won't be ready for the next world because we spend too much time worrying about what's going on in this world. And that's the last word.